Grief is the process we go through when we are losing something or someone we care about deeply. And it's complicated because whether you are experiencing preparatory grief, which is what you go through when you are losing someone gradually to a progressive and degenerative disease over an extended period of time, or whether you are contending with grief after death, you need to be aware that this is hard. There is no scale to measure the depth, the intensity, or the pain of a person's grief. And it's not a linear process either. You don't ever start at point A and end up at point B on any certain date. Every person's grief is as unique and personal as the relationship they had with the person before the illness, before the death. And the symptoms of grief are remarkably similar to the symptoms of depression. It's not at all unusual for caregivers to experience anger and frustration, overwhelming feelings of guilt, tension, headaches, backaches, anxiety disorders and panic attacks, weight loss or gain, difficulty sleeping, and loss of objectivity, which leads to an inability to view the situation realistically. And of course, sadness, a longing for what was and will never be again. It's an overwhelming sense of loss. Now, preparatory grief challenges you physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And as a result, it frequently leads to caregiver depression. So, like most caregivers, Madelyn began grieving her husband years before he died. She had never heard the terms preparatory grief or anticipatory grief, but she was living it. She often said, "My husband died on October 30th, 1993. We just haven't gotten around to burying him yet." She thought that when someone was seriously ill, it could feel like they had been dead for as long as a person was taking care of them. Like most caregivers, Madelyn struggled to maintain her own emotional equilibrium while constantly having to adjust to the progression of Quentin's disease. She grieved the loss of so many of his qualities and abilities that she had always cherished. She was grieving the loss of his physical capabilities because he had always been so strong. He could do anything, fix anything, build anything. And now, as the prostate cancer was advancing and as he had had a few more strokes, he couldn't. And he would sit slumped at the kitchen table with his chin on his chest. Once in a while, he'd lift his head and look out the window at the hill where he used to farm, but he rarely smiled. So she was also grieving the loss of his cognitive abilities, his diminished common sense, his clear thinking. She missed his optimism, his cheerfulness, and his good humor. But most of all, she missed him and the relationship that they had enjoyed for so many years. And, in addition, she was grieving the fact that she no longer had any time to herself. She had lost her freedom to come and go as she pleased. She had dropped out of her volunteer organizations and social groups, which meant she was missing having stimulating conversations and laughter with interesting friends. She was grieving the loss of their future plans. They had finally reached a point where they had the time and the money to travel. And the winter before Quentin's first stroke, they escaped the bitter Kansas cold and wind, and they rented an apartment in Florida close to my mother's sister, Jean, and her husband, Frank. For 10 glorious weeks, they reveled in the warmth and the sunshine. Quentin played golf with my Uncle Frank 2 to 3 times a week. Madelyn took a course at the local church, and they often went out to eat with Jean and Frank's friends. So she said it was the happiest, most carefree 10 weeks of her entire lifetime. And they had made reservations for the same apartment beginning the week after Christmas. And the morning that Quentin had his stroke, she had started packing for their trip. And then everything changed. A few years later, she wrote and said, "I'm sorry to tell you this, but sometimes when I look at your father, I don't see him. Rather, what I see is a repulsive, disgusting old man. When he sits around in his Depends all day long and sometimes doesn't even bother to put pants on, when he overloads his spoon and he spills half of his food down the front of his shirt, when he doesn't talk or laugh or make any effort to do any of his exercises so he can get stronger, I get angry and frustrated with him. And sometimes when I look at him, all I feel is disgust." Then the other day, I thought, this is not the Quentin that I have known and loved for so many years. I know he's not doing any of the things that irritate and upset me on purpose. He can't help it. So I'm trying to focus on who he was before the stroke. He used to be so careful. Before he had the stroke, he would never come into the house wearing his dirty work boots. He would never walk across the carpet when he was wearing his work clothes. He always hung his clothes up in an orderly fashion. His dress clothes were here and his work clothes were there, and they were always buttoned up and facing in the same direction. He was always so thoughtful and so careful. And he was well read. He would always read the Hutchinson News, the High Plains Journal, Successful Farming, and Time magazine from cover to cover. He had wonderful table manners, and he was so much fun to be with. I was always proud to be his wife. I have to remember now who he used to be. And I have to remember that he is still in there. So recently, when I've looked at him, and my initial response is to be repulsed, I try to conjure the image of who he used to be. I see him laughing, and it seems to help. Well, this letter still breaks my heart, but I think it's important to share because as long, slow diseases progress, we grieve the loss of who our person used to be. We grieve the changes and the losses of what we used to be able to do. We grieve the loss of the life that we thought we would be living at this time, and we grieve the losses that we anticipate are still ahead. It's hard. So how do you develop an attitude of creative indifference toward grief? Well, it's the same 3-step process that we have been applying to all of the other emotional challenges of caregiving. Step 1 is to become aware. Write down the things that you have lost and the grief that you feel over what is no longer possible. The second step is acceptance. And again, acceptance is the hardest step because we have to accept that preparatory grief is an ongoing process. As your care receiver's condition progresses and as their physical and cognitive abilities decline, the demands on you, your time, your physical energy, and your emotional stress are going to increase. So what I'd like for you to do next is to list the challenges and adjustments you expect you will need to deal with as you go forward. This is not fun, but once you name the things that are most likely to happen, you can then take action by identifying the resources, the programs, and the people who can assist you in making good choices and getting prepared for whatever lies ahead.